The major concern that I have about this entire issue is that already millions are starving and dying of starvation in a dozen different regions in the world because of the doubling of world food prices, which according to the World Bank arose almost exclusively from the biofuels scam, which is itself a spin-off from the global warming scare. And the reason why the biofuels scam doubled world food prices is that, to take the United States as an example, something like 1/3 of its agricultural land is no longer growing food for people who need it there and in the rest of the world. Instead, it is growing biofuels for clunkers that don't. Now, the concern is this. Recently, I was in Madrid addressing a meeting of government and opposition leaders on this question of third world poverty. And I told the story of how in Haiti, one of the poorest countries in the world, they are now living on mud pies made with real mud. They're eating mud to stay alive. A tiny pinch of butter and a little pinch of salt if they can afford it. And then if they can't afford anything themselves, they make these mud pies and they sell them to their neighbors for 3 US cents each. Now, one of the ladies in the front row burst into tears. And she said, "I'm horrified, but I'm also delighted," she said, "because you're the first person in the Western world talking at any climate change conference who has shown any understanding of the consequences of the policies being advocated and pursued by the UN and its various member nations for the poorest people of the third world." And she said, "I'm afraid I have to add some news to your experience of Haiti." She said, "I've just come back from there, and now they can't even afford 3 cents for a month." So we are not just debating some abstract scientific concept. We're debating something very serious. And one of the most despicable things about this compromise draft, which the Guardian quite rightly drew, and I think we must congratulate the Guardian for getting hold of this book and bringing it out into the public. I want to hear a round of applause for the Guardian for doing it.
I urge you to take out advertisements in the Guardian and pay my wages and we can carry on this.
Yes, that might be going a little far, but we are nevertheless very grateful to the Guardian. What it revealed was a dismal and disgraceful double standard. On the one hand, we in the West should be allowed to emit 2.76 tons of CO2 per person per year. I forget the exact figure, but it was more or less half that was all that the third world was allowed to emit. Now, it is blindingly obvious to anyone who has ever been and spent any time in any third world country that the only way we're going to get poverty eradicated and populations to stabilize is by bringing up the general level of prosperity in poorer countries. That's why it's necessary to allow them to burn plenty of fossil fuels, because that's the cheapest way to get the electricity that will help to lift them from poverty. So that is my take on the Danish document. We now move very quickly on. Just one last point of information. I believe that the land area of Bangladesh over the last 30 years since satellites have been watching has increased by 70,000 square kilometres. And although some of that may have been caused by silting and deltic changes, which you would expect in a very active river like the Ganges, nevertheless, it is certainly not evidence for massive sea level rise and loss of territory. And I can also inform you that when Professor Myrna went with a large number of other scientists to Bangladesh, the only one who calibrated his GPS altimeter correctly by making sure that he went to 2 different heights at least 10 meters apart so as to allow the acquisition of the satellites in the right manner was Professor Myrna. And having done that, he is able to estimate sea level changes to the nearest inch. And nobody else did that. I should also explain that Professor Myrna is perhaps the world's foremost expert on sea level rise, having written in his long and immensely distinguished professorial career some 530 papers in the peer-reviewed literature, of which a goodly proportion were on the subject of sea level rise. He deserves, therefore, to be listened to with respect and congratulated. Thank you.